الله أكبر
حي على الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر.
I rise giving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the highest of praise and the highest of honors to his holy and divine prophet, Noble Ali. I would like to extend those honors to the forerunner, the harbinger, the honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who did born and stir up the nations. I want to give honors to the Moorish American standard, the red flag with the green five-pointed star in the center, representing the highest principles known to man, which is love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. And I also want to acknowledge the United Mercantile Trading Banner, also known as the American flag. I want to give honors to all Moorish Americans, both past, present, and future, who strive to promote this holy and divine movement by way of the Prophet's holy instructions and divine laws. And I want to give honors to all organizations who strive to promote the interests of Asiatics and people of indigenous descent living in America. Islam?
Islam.
I want to give honors to the office of Temple Number 19, the office of the Grand Governor, the Assistant Grand or the Lieutenant Grand Governor, the Sheik staff, the admin staff, and the mighty M19 who keep the peace. And last but certainly not least, I want to give honors to you, the elves and bays in our sacred groves, because when man honors man, he honors our Father God, Allah. Islam?
Islam.
All praises are due to Allah once again for having us here on another holy day evening, so we may continue to build on things that make us better citizens and reason together. I wanted to start off by saying gratitude for each and every one of you who took part in casting your sacred ballot and doing as the Prophet instructed in voting. I know this is a trying, well, I wouldn't say a trying time, but I would say this is a time where Moorish Americans and Moors alike, they tend to split, and there's a house divided. But those who are diligent in following the holy instructions and divine laws of our Prophet, Noble Ali, know that they are to do what they are asked. That is the very reason why we are given instructions and divine laws, so we may hear, and obey. The underlining question is always that I've been having to ask this week and earlier last week. The main question is, did the Moors put said officials in the office? Or in other words, did we raise them up amongst the ranks of our organization, of this Moorish Divine National Movement? And the answer, quite frankly, no. And there is quite a few reasons why. One reason is simply because no member has shown them, or no member or any sympathizer has shown themselves approved or worthy. Another reason is that we have to have the numbers to do so. We as Moorish Americans, we are playing a part as being American citizens. When we graduate or when we advance to having a voting block or casting a Moorish American block, we have to have the numbers. We have to have both sympathizers, Asiatics, and Moorish Americans alike, who are on one accord and share the same agenda. So in order for us to do that, we have to meet. That is one of the reasons why we meet on a Friday. I say more than often that this is not just a social club or a place where you can just come and hear some philosophical rhetoric or jargon. This is where we come to, where we gather to unite. This is where we gather to build, to literally build one another. And that means that in times we may have disagreements, but this is the place where we hash these things out. So when we separate into the world, we all are on one accord, and we act according to code. Not to use the same word twice, but that is one of the things that we fall short as Asiatics, both Moorish American and those that are outside of this Moorish Divine National Movement. We have an issue of inconstancy when it comes to unity. I'll speak more on that a little later, but something as simple as voting and having an agenda. And having an agenda is something as simple as getting together in your community. So, this concept of organizing, this concept of politics, is not just putting someone in the office. It's about organizing. It's about being involved, as the Prophet said, in the affairs of men. And the affairs of men is not, contrary to popular belief, is not so black and white as it may seem. So, being in the affairs of men does involve compromise. And we being part of not the conscious community, but part of the enlightened community, part of those that deem themselves worthy of a spiritual and a practical thought, if you will. We are supposed to be on that level where we say, hey, this is what's going on in our communities, regardless of what camp you're from. It needs to be better. And we need to put certain procedures in place within our community to make this thing better. All the way from the individual to the household to the school to the neighborhood. That is genuine politics. So before we go any further with the governor, the office of the governor, or so on and so forth, what's going on in our community? Knowing what's going on in our community, we'll be able to establish an agenda. So, but nobody has talked to each other in the community, set apart from something that is honestly non-productive. If I may draw from the words of the great and honorable Neely Fuller Jr. We as Asiatics, he refers to us as black people. We have a tendency to get together and do everything except for organize. And this is not to slight or disrespect anyone, but that's just the thing. How many of us, how many of us, even after we've come into the ranks of the Moorish Science Temple of America, go over, our homeboy's house or our homegirl's house just to chill? You know what I mean? So we can't afford to chill anymore. We can't afford to just come over somebody's house and kick it. And it may sound crude, it may sound a little rigid, but we're in this era of time where we can't afford to slack. Because every day, every moment, every hour that we slack, we take 2 steps back in our progression. While everyone else going along this world, not only are they voting, but they're also taking their place in the affairs of men. They're not just voting, but they're making sure that the people that that they have elected in office, that they hold them accountable. So that takes for each an individual in their communities to have a representative. So we don't, there's levels, and part of those levels is, and part of this process is knowing the rules of engagement. And this is something that we in the Moorish Science Temple of America are supposed to be at the helm. If anything, we are supposed to be teaching the things that make us better citizens. So that includes knowing what to look for. If we're talking about potholes in the streets, then if anything, someone should be calling the Moorish American in the neighborhood. Have you made yourself known in the neighborhood that you live in? Let's start from there. If you made yourself known in the neighborhood that you live in, peace, greetings, good afternoon, etc., etc. My name is Rashid Ibn Haliym-Bey. I just moved in the neighborhood. But I'm also part of Moorish Science Temple of America, an organization that strives to promote community development. And then you go on by saying if there's any issues in the community, let me know, and we'll take the steps to do that. It may not happen overnight. When you do when you have a community meeting, it may you may have just yourself, and then after a period of time, people may come, but you just have to keep pushing. So and these are the people that that you can be bringing into the Moorish Science Temple of America, because once you get the community up and running and at least being productive and organized, if you will, then you can say, look, if you want to take it a little bit further, I want you to come down and hear about your nationality, knowing that there's again that there's steps to this. Now we got our community in order. Let's work on solidifying this representation. Let's work on solidifying our ranks, our status in society. sometimes you have to spoon feed the Asiatic. You can't just hit them upside the head with "you're not Negro, Black, and colored." You have to remind them that when they, when they're gone and as they go out through life, every little thing from as soon as you come out that household, it affects you. We talking about traffic. Anybody that moved to Atlanta talks about traffic. But have any one of us, at least went to a city council meeting and, raised the question, why is there so much traffic? To at least get an answer and say, and if anything, have some form of solution saying, okay, well, can we do this? We have honors to the city workers because, they take the time and the sacrifice to go out there and risk their lives through this, through this very interesting Atlanta traffic. But, why are they working throughout the day? When it holds up, people getting home. And don't get me wrong, the people that's working, the construction workers and the city workers, they want to go home to their wives too. But this is where we come and we reason together. This is where we come and compromise. Try to come up with some solution to where things can flow properly. Because we move and then we hit a wall, and then we try to figure out how to climb the wall, and then we go again and then we hit another wall. Not knowing that this whole time there may be a hammer that we can knock the wall down, maybe a ladder that we can scale the wall. But we sit there we sit there and we try to figure out how we're gonna cross this road, how we're gonna cross this wall, how we're gonna get over this wall. When all the time, and what's interesting, this wall is so long, and if we look to the left or to the right, we realize that it may be other people trying to get across the wall as well. So this is where we demonstrate this hand press and say, well, look, if maybe you can get on my shoulder and you can get over this wall, and then I can reach my hand out, as the prophet said in his holy instructions, and raise you up. You know what I'm saying? So these are things that we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about this as Moorish Americans in our day-to-day lives, on a day-to-day basis. The shoulder, it rests on us, and it's a mighty charge that we have, and it takes time. But as it says in chapter 1, just planting that seed and gradually cultivating that seed, and knowing that, if we're wise enough, we can plant quite a few seeds, and some will grow slower than others. Some will have, some will even have things the leaves that bloom. Some of them will even have broken blades. But as the prophet says, how are you to only save? If we were to save, if we were to save all of the blades of grass or stalks of leaves that are not broken versus the ones that are, you'll see that we may not have enough to even fill our hands. That was a paraphrase, but y'all get the point. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this so we can get our minds ready to know that this is not where the buck stops. If you have voted, the work is not done. Still not done. Now we gotta, contrary to popular belief, some of us may not even know that, what Stacey Abrams' agenda is. We may just have voted for her because, she's an Asiatic. Mashallah. But, if you had take the time, and I want to give honors to our fellow M19, our brother Akil, that, that was able to give us a template for how we should vote. And he gave us some very good information, and information that if we as Moorish Americans, we take advantage of it, that we could very well, have progress, especially coming into 2020 with the census and zoning and things of that nature. So, as Brother Yosef as I was listening to his measure, for whatever reason, he mentioned the Moorish Science Temple of America, and he mentioned, the Moorish Divine and National Movement, and so on and so forth. Temple stood out. For whatever, I had to recall to memory, what was Temple. One of Temple number 19's monikers is Al-Hakal. Al-Hakal is in Arabic, literally means the temple, Al-Hakal. And so when we talk about a temple, of course, by default, because we are a deep people, we can talk about the physical temple. We can talk about, the mental temple, the dome of purity. I've been, ever since last Sunday school meeting, I've been throwing up dome of purity a whole lot. But going deeper, or going just a little bit further into the definition, rather, of temple. Okay, so temple, it serves two things. One thing is for worship. And what's interesting is it can be one of two things. It can be, I'll just stick with the worshiping of a deity. All right? A temple can also double, have a double usage, if you will, as a quote-unquote church, masjid, so on and so forth. It is ultimately a ubiquitous place of worship. But specifically about that temple that doesn't go on anywhere else, whether it be a church, synagogue, or masjid. And keep in mind, this doesn't go on, is that in temples you have sacrifice. Nowhere else. And when you go to, as a matter of fact, when you go to, if you were raised up under the degrees of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Prophet Abraham, you know that's one of the things that, coming into that era that he was, that he received revelations from Allah. That's what they were talking about, not directly sacrificing animals or human beings. So when the quote unquote church was formed, that practice was ousted. Same thing in the masjid. One of the Islamic Eids or festivals is Eid al-Adha, and in Eid al-Adha you demonstrate the custom of quote unquote sacrificing a goat or a lamb. All right, but that's done outside of the masjid. It's not done within the masjid. Only in the temple are you allowed to practice the custom of sacrifice. So the question that I pose to the Moorish American is, being that we are in the Moorish Science Temple of America, what is it that we're sacrificing? Our prophet, or as it's said in the Moorish Holy Quran, where it talks about what, as we as worshipers of Father God Allah, what in the lessons of Isa, or Jesus, or justice rather, it talks about what are we to sacrifice. We are to sacrifice our bodies, our hearts. Use our hearts as an altar, that open flame. That's a demonstration of the cart of Krishna being ablaze. So when we talk about what are we sacrificing, we're sacrificing essentially ourselves, not literally where we're cutting ourselves or abusing ourselves or anything like that. But we're taking the time, first and foremost, one of the days where anyone else would relax after a work day, the evening rather. Go out and party, go to the clubs, go to the lounge, go to the bar, But we as Moorish Americans, we as Asiatics that are interested in Moorish Divine National Movement, that want our condition to be better, we sacrifice our time. We sacrifice our thoughts. What do I mean by sacrificing our thoughts? Because we come into the Moorish Science Temple of America as sympathizers, as Asiatics, and even as Moorish Americans, we are to remove any thoughts of, or we are to keep our minds open for any the thoughts of our Prophet Noble Drew Ali, whatever, or the instructions of our Prophet Noble Drew Ali. So whatever, notions that we had, when we hear the words of our prophet, we have to say, okay, well, this is what I used to think, and this is what our prophets are saying. So now I have to kill off, essentially sacrifice these thoughts that I have. And when you sacrifice, you're making room for something else. So when you think of temple, think of those two things. Think of this is a place where we worship. This is a place where we sacrifice our time, our well-being, and we build ourselves up to be, we build our hearts up rather to be these altars, these altar fires. So each individual person, again, when you separate into the world, when you go back out to the cares of the world, each and every one of us is an altar. Each and every one of us is a representation of our Prophet Noble Ali and the spirit and the part of Allah, Islam. I want to give honors to Shrine of the Black Madonna, not just in the city of Atlanta, but in their respective cities in Detroit and in, I believe, Houston, Texas. And, one would consider themselves to be a fool if they were, for me as a Moorish American, to give honors to, an institution called the Shrine of the Black Madonna and mint over words of the Shrine of the Black Madonna, if you will. But they embody the importance of a body politic because they are a religious organization that also practices a form of nationality. And part of that practice of nationality is forming a voting bloc or establishing a voting bloc. Shrine of the Black Madonna have what you call a black slate. And a black slate is, interestingly enough, very similar, again giving honors to our M19 brother Akil. It was just basically a list of what we as Moorish Americans are supposed to be voting for, or who are we to be voting for when we go to the polls. So part of the process that the Shrine of Madonna, of the Black Madonna, part itself, Shrine of the Black Madonna, what they do is they actually take the time out to interview these officials. So they'll call up anyone that's locally, and if they can't meet up with them in person, then they'll see if they can set up a call, and then they'll ask them questions. They'll say, well, what is it? What is your agenda? And it's one thing to read an agenda, but then it's another thing to have them say it, because once they say it, those that know, your word is your bond. So for them to say it and to say, okay, well, this is my agenda, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to fight for, this is what I'm going to do to represent you. Based on that interview, they get together as a collective and they deliberate and they say, okay, well, these are the laws and policies and officials that we are going to vote on and that we are going to elect. And this is a council, this is a committee. And then once, everything is agreed upon, it's a pamphlet or like a piece of paper about the size of this that has the list. And they hand it to each and every member because they know it is their civic duty as citizens to cast a ballot. And that way, regardless if you had attended any of their meetings or what have you, you as a member of that organization, this is what you're obligated to do. So that, my friend, is organization. And this is something that we as Moorish Americans in the Moorish Science Temple of America need to reestablish. Because even if it's not in that sense what the Prophet did during his time of being in the form, you can see a reminiscence of that within the organization of the Shrine of the Black Madonna. And again, I give honors to them because not only do they demonstrate the concepts of nationality just as being quote unquote politically involved, but they are politically involved. They have businesses, they have their own, they have apartment complexes, so on and so forth, or apartment complex now. So they were able to give the members what they needed so they can be better members and thus be better citizens. Islam? Well, this is something, again, we in Moorish Science Temple of America, we should be striving to reestablish. What I want to do is, keeping on the subject of politics, our prophet, Noble Drew Ali, giving us this pamphlet. And within the pamphlet, he gave us instructions on how we are to conduct ourselves in society. And what's interesting is that I was thinking to myself, okay, is there a particular chapter that I can read to kind of bring this home? And the answer is no. There's no single chapter. There are quite a few chapters. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to read each and every chapter, of course, but I am going to read a portion of it and expound upon that. So again, just to recap this pamphlet. So it starts off by telling us that this is about the life or the secret life of Jesus or Justice, 18 years in his development. This is for all that love Jesus. This is for all that love justice. Dear readers, teach these lessons to your children so they may learn to love instead of hate. Dear mothers, etc., etc. Dear fathers, etc., etc. So you can put your house in order. We already talked about the concept of a temple, and that temple being that place of not just for worship but for sacrifice. So again, when we talk about we ourselves, our temples, then what are we initially saying? What are we bringing? What affirmation are we saying? What are we bringing or manifesting? Are we saying that we just temples just to sound deep, or are we really keeping our temples clean and doing what a temple is supposed to do? Islam. But we go through the 18 years, lost years of Jesus, and simply put, he gives us degrees and lessons on ourselves, on how we are to better ourselves. From the point of creation all the way up to the point of creation all the way up into him ascending to Allah. So when you go from page 3 all the way to chapter 19, if you will, that's Act 2. Islam, for those who are familiar with Act 2, right? And then after that, I'm not going to get too deep into that. But then after that, you get instructions on how to conduct yourself in society. It starts off by saying, okay, once you get yourself in order, so to speak, then you have duties and obligation as a young man, as a young woman. And then it goes into saying that these are marriage instructions. And this is implying that our prophet is saying that when you have gotten yourself together as a man or as a woman, as a Moab or Moabitess, then you are to obligate with each other. That those that have the shared interest, Islam. So he gives us instructions on how to conduct yourself, marriage instructions for man and wife from the noble prophet. All right. Then he goes on by saying that you have the duty of a husband. Then there's duty, once you conceive children, the responsibilities of the parent and the child, which follows up or which confirms Act 7 in our divine constitution and bylaws. Then it goes into the holy covenant or a holy covenant of the Asiatic nation. So then it says, okay, once you get yourself in order, then you get your family in order, then you got to go out to the community. So now, as the sister so eloquently had demonstrated before, now you have a holy covenant. Now you have an obligation to your community, to your surrounding areas. Going back to the degree of Confucius, where it asks the question, who am I? And the answer is that I am one with Allah, I am my family, I am my community, I am my nation, etc., etc. So it's not, going in, and that coincides with what the prophet is saying. A man is not an island, is not an island to himself. He's bound by cords to every living thing. Islam? So this is the holy covenant of the Asiatic nation. Then it goes into unity. Islam? Talks about the gifts, and I'm just reading this in part, chapter 26, Holy Instructions of Unity. The gifts of the understanding are the treasures of Allah, and He appointed to everyone his portion and what measure seemeth good unto himself. Islam? That reinforces the measure or the ayat that our sister secretary had given in the Quran of Muhammad. It said, Allah has divided you into nations and tribes so you may understand one another. Islam? Goes on by saying in chapter 26, instruction 2, hath he endowed thee with wisdom? Hath he enlightened thy mind with the knowledge of truth? Communicated to the ignorant for their instruction, communicated to the wise for thy own improvement. So we, again, as Moorish Americans, should be upholding to the law. This is reinforcing Act 6. We are to teach our people their nationality and their divine creed. Sometimes we have to go back and reteach each other what it means to be a Moorish American. Because sometimes we forget, sometimes we just think of ourselves as being Moors and not Moorish Americans. But we are part and parcel of this said government. Therefore, we have to adhere to all these things that allow us to be citizens, that will allow us to raise our status as citizens and not consider ourselves, under second-class citizens and being oppressed. Islam? But it says, but our prophet is giving us instructions on how to unite with one another. That is one of our charges when we look at, or one of our sigils, if you will, when we read the divine constitution and bylaws. Salvation of our unity, right? So, goes on by saying, true wisdom is less presuming than folly. The wise man doubteth often and changes his mind. The fool is obstinate and doubteth not. He knoweth all the things but his own ignorance. Now my question to you is, when we talk about, he's giving us this chapter on unity. But in this chapter of unity, he starts off by, giving us the concept of everyone basically has to work together. Everyone doesn't know it all. Allah has split the wisdom up, his wisdom into each and every one of us. And that goes back to us being a spirit and a part of Allah. So then, why does our Prophet Noble Drew Ali go into the differences between the wise man and the fool? Let's think about that for a moment. Because then he goes on by saying that the pride of emptiness, the pride of emptiness is an abomination. And to talk much is foolishness or folly. Nevertheless, it is a part of wisdom to hear with patience and impertinence and to pity their absurdity. So one of the things, amongst many reasons why, is that it reminds us to make sure that we keep close company. That we have to surround ourselves with people of like minds. And that if we are not able to, at that moment, to surround ourselves with people of like minds, then he gives us instructions on the nature of the fool. The nature of those that don't want to unite. And again, our sister Lamadia, she preludes that by talking about this concept and this idea, which is a very beautiful demonstration, talking about the concept of the independent family, or the individual, or the individualism. And we talk about that quite often. But to consider yourself to be an island, to consider yourself to be a loner, that is foolishness and folly. To think that you're not able to do that you're gonna do things without the assistance of others. So it goes throughout the chapter giving the differences between the wise man and the fool. Talking about the wise man is fearless his imperfections, he is humble, he laboreth in vain for his own approbation or his own approval. While the fool goes down to the deepest depths of the seas of the ocean and the cares of the world, if you will, and brings up pebbles as if they're, and as if they're jewels, but nevertheless they're worthless baubles, right? But and within that there's a parallel, because it talks about Jesus going to the highest of heights and the lowest of the depths, so that he may be able to relate, I'm paraphrasing, to relate to his brother man or his sister. But he does it with sincerity. He does it with integrity and being genuine. Just like the sister said, you're not doing it to be the deepest person in the room. If you're in a room with anyone from a different school of thought, as I mentioned before, as Brother Neely Fuller said, we should be talking about how we are to unite. We should be talking about how we're going to hash out whatever differences is and come out there with a plan, with an agenda on how to unite. And if we are not doing that, if we are just boasting over superior understanding, then just like the sister said, we're demonstrating vanity, which is definitely a form of weakness, as our prophet tells us further on in this pamphlet, Islam. All right. Then after he gives us the instructions of unity, he says, then now you have to understand the unity of the rich and the poor. Right? So within this election, this midterm election, part of the conversation is what is going to happen to the middle class. What is happening to the working class. We want to make sure that the middle class and the quote-unquote working class do not become impoverished. And what are we doing for those that are considered to be impoverished? Are we putting programs in place so we can raise them up financially? All right. Are we setting up legislation or programs to where people that want to start small businesses can benefit from that, so we can build more small businesses in the community or more businesses in the community? And again, this goes back to, and this is all under our sister Stacey Abrams and what she desires to do. So if we as Moorish Americans or we as Asiatics don't take the time to read and understand what is it that this sister is looking to do, and we just vote for her and then we just sit down and be like twiddling our thumbs and not taking advantage of the things that she promised, that she said she was going to do on the agenda, then whose fault is it? She's done her job. We haven't done ours. It's not over with. So it goes on in chapter 7 saying, the man to whom Allah has given riches and blessed with a mind to employ them aright is peculiarly favored and highly distinguished. He looketh on his wealth with pleasure, because it affordeth him the means to do good. Right? Goes on by saying, he protecteth the poor that are injured. He suffereth not the mighty to oppress the weak. Right? He seeketh out the objects of his compassions and inquireth into their wants. He relieveth them with judgment and without ostentation. All right? And I'm going to go down and say what does it say? Then it goes down by saying, but woe unto him that heapeth up wealth in abundance and rejoice alone in the possession thereof, that grindeth in the face of the poor and considereth not the sweat of their brows. And this is the situation that's happening now, the haves and the have-nots. But our prophet has given us the demonstration on what? Us having a Rotarian complexion. And the responsibility of being a Rotarian is, for one, is to set up a business in the community, and to also give back to your community by way of monetary assistance or by way of community outreach. Right? This is the degree of the Rotarian. Goes on. The next chapter is the holy instructions from the prophet, master and servant. And as we can see, as we go along, there's a gradual development from the individual, or from the seed, if you will, and him being cultivated. Because the seed is being cultivated by the quote-unquote degrees of Jesus through his 18 years, his 18 mysterious years, if you will. And then once he's cultivated, if you will, then you see this flower starts to bloom and to unfold. But it's even as we once if those who has a green thumb in here, I don't have a green thumb. Who's grown a plant or a flower? All right. So once this seed starts to grow and starts to sprout, do you just stop watering it? Do you stop cultivating? No. In certain cases, you have to even like polish the leaves, and in certain cases, some of us talk to it. Some of us rotate the soil. if you will. Everything to make sure that there's a proper foundation for this flower and this plant to grow until its full potential. So our prophet says, okay, yeah, you have the lessons and the degrees of Jesus, but I still need to cultivate you, because this is how to build yourself up. Going back to what the prophet said earlier in the Moorish literature, he says our problems are social and economic, but in a profound sense, they're moral and spiritual.
Islam.
So when we get these degrees from chapter 1 all the way to 19, that's that moral and spiritual foundation that needs to be cultivated, that needs to be developed. And then once we cultivate and we have established in our own minds and raised up to a high level of thought, then we can understand the social and economic portion of it. Islam? So then it talks about the whole instructions from the prophet, master and servant. So now, with us being conducting ourselves in society, now we have to learn as grown people how to take orders from other grown people. Right? How many of us, well, I'm not going to answer that question. What I will say is this is one of the inconsistencies within society. I'm not going to even limit it to the Asiatic, but it's in society. Some of us know how to take orders. Some of us know how to hear and obey. But then you have others that, as I've said before, that because they presume that they're old enough, that they quote unquote have a job and they have a house, that that they're responsible and they don't need to take orders from someone. But every leader has a leader. Every leader is a follower. There's no one that is there's no human, there's no man, let me not say human being, there's no man on the face of this planet Earth that is not taking orders from someone. And for those who think that they are, they are mistaken. They are definitely mistaken. Even those that work in service, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that whatever services that you provide and that you render is accommodating your client. And if it's not, in that case, you are a servant to your client. Islam? Because if you don't serve him properly, then you won't get paid. Then you're going to be back at square one. But let me read that. He says, repine not, O man. It says instruction 1, repine not, O man, at the state of servitude. It is the appointment of Allah. Let's just stop right there. Repine not, O man, at the state of servitude. It is the appointment of Allah, and hath many advantages. It removeth thee from the cares and solicitudes in life. All right? The honor of a servant is his fidelity, is his faith, is his truth. His highest virtues are submission and obedience. And believe it or not, I believe it was you, Brother Kennedy, that mentioned it. It was another mastermind that said that even the highest, how did you say it? I'm a paraphrase. I'm probably jacking it up. But it says the
highest position is the highest servant.
There you go. Say it again.
The highest position is the highest servant.
Islam. Couldn't have said it better myself. So the fact that even though you are a magistrate or that you are a sultan or an official doesn't mean that you are not bound to just give orders. You are to truly understand the people that are subservient to you, and make sure that you are able to, again, accommodate their needs. Because if you're able to accommodate their needs, then they will accommodate your needs, and thus you'll have a well-oiled machine. I often go back to the time that I worked in a warehouse, and as a supervisor, as a manager at that time, I learned that it's the best way to, and it goes into this as well, the best way to have great associates is to make sure that they're happy. And making sure that they're happy doesn't mean that they have to walk all over you, but even taking in consideration that you care, that you're in favor of their well-being. All right, and I'll go further down. So let me see if I can skip down to it. It says, it goes down to instruction 9. Actually, instruction 7 says, the spirit of a man is in him. Actually, let's go up one more. Instruction 6. And thou who art a master, be just to thy servant, if thou expecteth from him fidelity, loyalty, and reasonable in thy commands, if thou expecteth ready obedience. The spirit of a man is in him. And that's what some of us as leaders, we forget. We forget that even sitting on high, when we look down, we're looking at a spirit and a part of Allah. And thus we're looking at a reflection of ourselves. So therefore we have to be a servant to man, a servant to humanity, a servant to yourself. Know thyself and thy Father God Allah. Islam? The spirit of man is in him. Severity and rigor may create fear, but can never command love. Islam? Mix kindness with reproof and reason with authority. So shall their admonitions take place in his heart, and his duty shall become his pleasure. So going back to what I was saying before, working in the warehouse, brothers that have families, you know, I basically got the place where I was working at, the majority of the employees there, they were students at a seminary, and they were also family men. And so, you know, I made sure that they were getting home at time to study and getting home, because some of them, they come from the seminary classes and from their courses, and they come straight to work. So I make sure that, you know, they get home in time to see their family, have dinner with their family, and so on and so forth. So when there's time where there's time for me in need, I can just come to them and ask, and I can say, look, bro, you know, this is we having a bigger workload, you know, tonight. Can you stay? And I kid you not, by Allah, you know, I had one man, and it warmed my heart. And he said, you know, he said, man, for you, I'll do it. You know, and so when somebody, you know, to me, that's an example of sacrifice. Because he didn't have to say that. He could have said, okay. But he, you know what I'm saying? He, you know, when it shows appreciation. And it, you know, it enables you to strive and continue to do better as a leader. But it goes on in instruction 9 to say, he shall serve thee faithfully from the motive of gratitude. He shall obey thee cheerfully from the principle of love, and fail thou not in return to give his diligence and fidelity their proper reward. Simply put, receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations. Islam? Then it goes into chapter 29, magistrate and subject. And this is a major part of developing a society, is when you understand how to work with each other, understand the checks and balances of order. You know, then you can say, all right, who is to best represent this position of order? Who will preside and represent as the sovereign for your group, for your organization, for your nation? And this is where we as citizens, we as members, we have to decide. This is what most Moorish Americans on the topic of voting, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about, have we raised someone up from the ranks to represent our best interests? Goes on by saying, chapter 29, instruction 29, magistrate and subject, O thou, the favorite of heaven, whom the sons of men, thy equals, have agreed to raise to sovereign power and set as a ruler over themselves. Consider the ends and importance of their trust, their fidelity, far more than the dignity and the height of their station. Therefore, you should consider it an honor that people that are your equals have sacrificed a part of themselves. That's what happens when you're a sovereign, when you're a ruler. Going that there's that measure again of sacrifice. You're taking a part of yourself, a part of your power, and you're giving it to this individual. And for that exchange, that whatever part you're giving is supposed to be the interest that is supposed to serve you. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Islam.
So he asked, our prophet is urging us to consider that versus the fact that you're up in that station. Thou favorite of heaven, thou art clothed in purple and seated on a throne. The crown of majesty investeth thy temples. The scepter of power is placed in thy hand, but not for thyself were these incense given, not meant for thine own, but for the good of thy kingdom. Islam? That's the degree of the fez. That's the degree of the turban. When we talk about a throne, we're talking about a raised and a seated area. There's so many instances. For those that have the More Holy Quran in like PDF format, just search throne and see how many times it's mentioned. Research the definition of throne. All right, clothed in purple. What does it mean to be clothed in purple? Royalty, regalness. That's the what chakra? It's the third eye chakra. So that means that you have a insight, not just of the higher plane, but really the insight of all that you survey. Why? Because you were raised up to be able to see all that you survey. Islam?
Islam.
All right. Then it goes on, and I'm gonna close out from there because we can go on and on and on. But it goes on in chapter 30, holy instructions from the prophet, the social duties. All right. So now that we have raised someone up among the ranks to be our sovereign, that means that there are going to be some responsibilities as members. Will you all get a chance, if y'all haven't already, and pardon, I can't recall the memory. There's a chapter in the Piscean text talking about the Leviathan. And when y'all Google Leviathan, there should be an image that comes up of a king, and the king is actually the head, and he has like a body, and the body is actually made up of the people. But again, it's a chapter in the Piscean text in the Bible that talks about the Leviathan. The Leviathan is an analogy for a nation, for a people. But it just talks about how how the sum is greater than the parts, and that also goes into this concept of social duties. All right, when thou considerest thy wants, when thou beholdest thy imperfections, acknowledge his goodness, O son of humanity, who honored thee with humanity, endowed thee with speech, and placed thee in society to receive and confer reciprocal helps and mutual obligations, protections from injuries, and thy enjoyments of the comforts and the pleasures of life. All these thou owest to the assistance of others, and couldst not enjoy but in the bands of society. So so you have this concept again, bands, cords, bound by cords to every living thing. You're going to see that as a definite pattern. Again, going back to unity. If for those who have like an artistic mind, if you were to take the hand press in the in our divine constitution and bylaws, and also in our charter as well, and on your Moorish American card, your nationality card, if you put all of those, if you put all those hands together, it's a rope. That is a cord. And what I do like about this chapter is that from the gate, if we really pay attention to what he's saying when thou, going back to instruction 1, when thou considerest thy wants, when thou beholdest thy imperfections, acknowledge his goodness, O son of humanity, you, who honored thee with humanity, Allah, and yourself, endowed thee with speech, placed thee in society, etc., etc. So this goes back again into this the idea of Act 2 of our Moorish of our divine constitution, saying that this is the day when man was formed in flesh, and this is the day when he departed out of flesh and ascended into his Father God Allah. That mindset. Again, when we're ascending, we're going above high. And so we're able to look below and see and understand all that we survey. Islam? All right. Bringing it home, it goes on in verse 2. It is thy duty, therefore, to be a friend to mankind, as it is thy interest that man should be friendly to thee. Islam? Goes on, I'm skipping down to instruction 4. He enjoyeth the ease and tranquility of his own breast, and rejoiceth in the happiness and prosperity of his neighbor. You can't do that as an individual. The only way you can do that is, well, you can't. Just like I said before. How many of us know our neighbors? How many of us say hello to our neighbors? Do your neighbors know who you are? You know what organization you belong to. Knowing that if there's any issue, if we can't do anything else at this moment, we should be some form of liaison representative to our own neighborhoods. If we don't have a community meeting, we should be striving to have one at least, once a month or bi-monthly or whatever, just so we can get familiar with each other. Just something to put out there. Islam, family?
Islam.
All right. So, in closing, the responsibility, it may seem major, but in all, it's not, because we should be doing this together. We should be doing this as a group. We always use the analogy, hand separated is not able to do the thing, but when it comes together, it's a mighty fist that can break stuff and be all powerful. I just threw all that out there. It's something like that, right? But the work is not done. The work is not done once the governor-elect is in office. The work is not done if it is the person that we elect, if it's the person that we don't elect. We still have a mighty work to do. And again, it starts with the self, but then it expands. And we have to remember that. We keep saying how it's self, but when we ask the question how it's self, interestingly enough, when we give the answer, it's really the reaction to what's going on around us. So if that should tell us something. If we're so-so, then why are we so-so? What's going on in our lives? What's in our cipher? What's in our circle that makes us so-so? If we're doing good, what is in our cipher? What is in our circle? What is in our vicinity? That makes us good. And can we, transfer that over? Can we adapt something? Can someone, adapt those principles and use it towards their life? So these are, things that we say not to just be sounding deep. Not how itself. We're asking you, how are you? How are you, and how is what surrounds you? How are you doing out here in the cares of the world? Are you swimming? Are you backstroking? Are you belly flopping? Are you drowning? Are you barely drowning? Do you have the little puffy things on to help you? It's a lot of things that we as Moorish Americans that we should be doing out there in the chaos of the world. We shouldn't just be, just swimming out there. Actually, as fishes do, we should be swimming in as a collective. We want to be sharks. What else swims by themselves? A whale. We want to be a whale. This big, deep thing that moves, waves and whatnot. I'm digressing. I'm just babbling now. Anyway, family. All praise is due to Allah.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
حي على الصلاة.
Allahu Akbar. Allah